Buddhism is a religion based on the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, who lived about 25 centuries ago in what is now Nepal and northeastern India. According to the most widely known story of his life, after experimenting with different teachings for years and finding none of them acceptable, Siddhartha spent a fateful night in deep meditation. During his meditation, all of the answers he had been seeking with regards to the nature of life, death, and existence became clear, and he achieved full awareness, thereby becoming the awakened one, or the Buddha.
In the remaining years of his life, the Buddha traveled and taught. However, he did not teach people what he had realized when he became enlightened. Instead, he taught people how to realize enlightenment for themselves. In the centuries following the Buddha's life, Buddhism spread throughout Asia to become one of the dominant religions of the continent. The most common estimate of the number of Buddhists in the world today is 350 million, which makes Buddhism the fourth largest of the world's religion.
The Buddha was born Siddhartha Gautama, a prince in India in the 6th century BC. The name bestowed upon him, Siddhartha, meant he who achieves his aim. His father, King Suddhodana, was the leader of an Indian tribe called the Shakyas. After Siddhartha's birth, King Suddhodana consulted an oracle and he prophesied great things. The young Siddhartha would either be a great king or he would become a great spiritual leader and be the savior of humanity.
King Suddhodana anxious for his only son to inherit his throne and become the next king, kept his son from witnessing the misery and suffering of the world, so that he would not go the ways of a sage. Siddhartha was raised in opulence in a palace built just for him. He was sheltered from knowledge of religion and human hardship. The elderly, the sickly, the dead, or anyone who had dedicated themselves to spiritual practice were kept away from the young prince. According to custom, he married a princess named Yashodhara for a neighboring country at the age of 16. But his life of total seclusion continued for another 13 years.
As Siddhartha continued living in the luxury of his palaces, he grew increasingly restless and was curious about the world beyond the palace walls and demanded to see his people and the lands. Unable to convince him otherwise, the king gave in, but he carefully arranged that Siddhartha should still not see the kind of suffering that would lead him to a religious life, and decreed that only young and healthy people should greet the prince. As Siddhartha was led through Kapilavatthu to the capital, he was astonished to see a couple of old men who had accidentally wandered near the parade route. Then he came across some people who were severely ill and realized the existence of diseases and illnesses. Finally, he chanced upon a funeral ceremony by the side of a river, and for the first time in his life saw a decaying corpse, death. Confused and probably horrified, he asked his friend and squire Chanaka the meaning of all these things, and Chanaka informed him of the simple truths that Siddhartha should have known all along, that all of us get sick, old, and eventually die. But beside the sufferings, Siddhartha saw an ascetic, a monk who had renounced all the pleasures of the flesh to seek release from the human fear of death and suffering. The peaceful look on the monk's face would stay with Siddhartha for a long time to come.
At the age of 29, having discovered suffering, Siddhartha came to realize that he could not be happy living as he had been, as he wanted more than anything to discover how he could overcome suffering. He decided to leave the palace, and one night, kissing his sleeping wife and newborn son Rahula goodbye, he snuck out of the palace with his horse and squire. Upon reaching the Anoma river, he stopped and shaved his head and changed into the robes of an ascetic, giving his squire his princely clothes to be returned to the palace. This marked the starting of Siddhartha's life outside the palace.
For the next 6 years, Siddhartha lived an ascetic life and partook in its practices, studying and meditating using the words of various religious teachers as his guide. However, answers to his questions did not appear, so he redoubled his efforts, enduring pain, refusing water, and fasting to near starvation by consuming only a grain of rice each day.
Despite all his effort, Siddhartha could not reach the level of satisfaction he sought. One day, a peasant girl named Sujata saw him and begged him to accept a bowl of new rice. As he accepted it, he suddenly realized that rather than living life at both extremes, luxury and asceticism, the middle path, the path of moderation, was much better.
Not wanting to give up his pursuit of enlightenment, Siddhartha decided to sit under a fig tree for as long as it would take for the answers to the problem of suffering to come. He sat there for many days, first in deep concentration, clearing his mind of all distractions, then in mindfulness meditation, opening himself up to the truth. He began to recall all his previous lives and to see everything that was going on in the entire universe.
It is said that Mara, the evil one, tried to prevent this great occurrence. He first tried to frighten Siddhartha with storms and armies of demons, but Siddhartha remained completely calm. Then he sent his 3 beautiful daughters to tempt him, again to no avail. Finally, he tried to ensnare Siddhartha in his own ego by appealing to his pride. That too failed. Siddhartha, having conquered all temptations, finally understood the answer to the question of suffering and became the Buddha, which means he who is awake.
The Four Noble Truths contains the essence of the Buddha's teachings. It was these 4 principles that the Buddha came to understand during his meditation under the Bodhi tree.
The first noble truth is dukkha, the truth of suffering. Suffering comes in many forms. 3 obvious kinds of suffering correspond to the first 3 sights the Buddha saw on his first journey outside his palace: old age, sickness, and death. But according to the Buddha, the problem of suffering goes much deeper. Physical suffering is merely the tip of the iceberg. Human beings are subject to desires and cravings. Hence, we strive to fulfill these wants. However, even when we are able to satisfy these desires, the satisfaction is only temporary. Pleasure does not last, or if it does, it becomes monotonous. Even when we are not suffering from outward causes like illness or bereavement, we are unfulfilled, unsatisfied. This is the truth of suffering. Fortunately, the Buddha's teachings do not end with suffering. Rather, they go on to tell us what we can do about it and how to end it.
The second noble truth is samudaya, the truth of the origin of suffering. The Buddha thought that the root of all suffering is thirst, tanha, associated with greed, desire, ignorance, delusion, hatred, and destructive urges. The Buddha went on to say the same of our 5 senses and the mind, showing that attachment to positive, negative, and neutral sensations and thoughts is the cause of suffering.
The third noble truth is nirodha, the truth of the end of suffering. The Buddha taught that the way to extinguish desire that causes suffering is to liberate oneself from attachment. We can be released from the narrow limits of self-interest into the vast expanse of universal life. We will be free of our torment, reaching enlightenment. This stage is called nirvana. Nirvana is a state of mind that humans can reach. After death, an enlightened person is liberated from the circle of rebirth. But Buddhism gives no definite answers as to what happens next.
The fourth noble truth is magga, the truth that there is a solution to end suffering, the eightfold path.
The 4th noble truth is the Buddha's prescription for the end of suffering. This is a set of principles called the eightfold path. The eightfold path is also called the middle way. It avoids both indulgence and severe asceticism, which the Buddha had found helpful in his search for enlightenment. The 8 stages can be grouped into wisdom, right understanding and intention, ethical conduct, right speech, action and livelihood, and meditation, right effort, mindfulness and concentration.
An important principle in Buddhism is the law of karma and rebirth, also known as samsara. The law of karma is simply the law of cause and effect. A positive action committed with good intentions will result in positive reaction, whilst a negative action with ill intent will result in a harmful negative reaction. However, the results of a negative action can be lessened or even neutralized by a positive one. It is the momentum generated by accumulated karma that leads to the continuity of existence, samsara. What decides where you come back and what you come back as is based on your actions. Conditions which we will experience in our future lives are dependent on the net result on our accumulated karma. The idea is to break the cycle of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth.
Buddhism is so different from other religions that some people question whether it is a religion at all. In most religions, the central focus is God or gods. But Buddhism is non-theistic. The Buddha taught that believing in gods was not useful for those seeking to realize enlightenment. Instead of teaching doctrines to be memorized and believed, the Buddha taught how we can realize the truth for ourselves. The focus on Buddhism is on practice rather than belief.